Hi, my name's Emma and I'm a huge book nerd.
You're my library, always open for business, but you never show it. You're just sitting with it, but I know the score and you're killing it.
Welcome to my January wrap-up video where I'm going to talk about all the books that I read in January and what I thought of them and all of that jazz. I read a total of 15 books in January, but like not actually 15. I actually read 13 and then parts of 2, which I'll explain when I get there. And then I read a total of 3,279 pages, which is like a really great month for me. Granted, some of these are audiobooks, so that like makes it easier to read more, you know? So the first book that I read in January was actually a digital arc, and that is Detective Knows Good and the Music Box Mystery by Marion Orlon. This is a children's detective mystery novel about this detective named Detective Knows Good, who's basically like Hercule Poirot from Agatha Christie. And he has this talking dog, and so he and his dog kind of like solve mysteries. And this is the first book in a series of these like mystery novels. I was just really unimpressed. I think my biggest problem with it was trying to be Hercule Poirot, but with no moral, very little of like that clever reasoning that we love so much in Agatha Christie's, and basically like every trope that you could possibly think of. It was very meh. In the end, I was just kind of like, what? Like it was, what? If you're not quite ready for Agatha Christie, do something like Nancy Drew or like the Hardy Boys or something. Like this is not, pass on this one. I gave it 2 stars. Next, in January, I listened to Wilde, From Lost to Found on the Pacific Crest Trail by Cheryl Strayed. Don't get me wrong, I really enjoyed this, but I didn't understand the buzz. I don't really think she learned that much or changed that much. She just like went on a walk and was like, I'm stronger than I think I am, kind of. I left my husband for basically no reason, even though I still loved him. I just needed to be alone. I was like, that's not how marriage works. She seemed like she gave up rather than trying to fix the things that were going wrong in her life. She like abandoned them all and took a walk and started completely over, which just felt like running away, which wasn't all that inspiring. I was not totally on board, but it was definitely interesting. I gave it 3 stars. I liked listening to it. Then I read Artemis by Andy Weir, and ooh boy, I have some thoughts about this. Let me preface this by saying I absolutely loved The Martian. Like, it is such a good book. And then he wrote this, and it's like it's trying to be YA science fiction. It felt a lot like the Lunar Chronicles or Illuminae, and the Lunar Chronicles did it better. The biggest problem I had with this was the treatment of the female main character. I mean, props to Andy for trying to write a female main character, but it felt like a 15-year-old boy writing about what he thought a grown woman's thoughts might be like. So she was over-sexualized in a really weird way. There was just all this unnecessary stuff about sex that did not play into the story in any way. And he didn't do that with Mark Watney in The Martian. But that's not the only reason I wasn't a big fan of this. I also didn't think that the story was very well constructed. There were a lot of little tiny loose plot lines floating around, like subplots, but none of them connected very well, and none of them had much of a payoff. Like, there would just be something that popped up and I was like, who is this character? And then they would like, we'd find out some like major new info about them, and it was supposed to be like this huge turn, like, oh, this person is like not who we thought they were. And I was like, we didn't know who they were in the first place. They're just a random person who showed up that she apparently has some connection with. It just did not pay off very well at all. And I was very annoyed with that because I was like, The Martian was wonderful. Don't try and be a YA science fiction writer. Be an adult science fiction writer. I think the world is very cool. I think the idea of a city on the moon is very cool, but it was not well executed. I ended up giving this a measly 2 stars. Next, I read Dog Songs by Mary Oliver. It's basically a collection of poetry about dogs. I'm taking a creative writing class right now and we're currently focusing on poetry. So this was interesting to read while we're focusing on poetry, but I actually didn't like it that much. I didn't dislike it, a lot of the stuff fell flat for me. It felt extremely free verse. I mean, the whole thing's free verse. Some of it was just prose, honestly, and I was a little underwhelmed. I still really want to read Mary Oliver's Devotions because I've seen some of her poetry that I love, but Dog Songs was just not for me, I don't think. I gave it 3 stars. Next in January, I read a book that I received directly from the author. It's called Pigeon Blood Red by Ed Duncan. This is basically a crime thriller where a guy is basically running from this very violent loan shark and his cronies are out to get this guy. There's a lot of love triangles and affairs and things, it's very in that genre. I was actually pleasantly surprised by this. I was kind of I don't know how I'm gonna feel about this, because I don't know if that's really my jam, but I really liked the angle it took. The main character is kind of one of these hitmen, and we get a really sympathetic look at him, and it's really interesting. I love problematic main characters. I think they're so much more interesting than perfect main characters, because no one in real life is perfect. It's just not real. I think if you're into this kind of crime novel, I think you'll really like it because it definitely puts a little bit of a different twist on it, and the writing was pretty good. It didn't blow my mind, but it's pretty good, and this is definitely a fast read, which I appreciated. So yeah, I gave it 3 stars. Next, I read Uncle Tom's Cabin, the play by George L. Aiken. I don't really know how to talk about this one. I read it for a class, for my modern theater history class, and it's a melodrama, and I just don't like melodrama. It's also very problematic because in the time period it was a bunch of white people performing in blackface, which we all know, or at least I hope we do. It was okay. It was a melodrama and an important piece of history. I gave it 3 stars. Then in January, I read a digital arc of The City Where We Once Lived by Eric Barnes. It's a dystopian novel basically about rebirth, is how I would describe it. It's about a city that's sort of emptied out of people. It's failed. There's no government there anymore, basically. Public services don't go there anymore. Police don't go there, firemen don't go there, but there are people who refuse to leave that are still living there. And one of these people still living there is our main character, and we follow him as he kind of tells us more about this city where they once lived. It started out really, really slow. It is definitely a slow burn. And I almost gave up on it because I was this is just dragging so much. Is it ever gonna go anywhere? But it goes somewhere, and it's really beautiful. And by the end, I was in tears, and I was this is gorgeous. Rebirth is definitely the word that I would use to describe it. It's just really beautiful, and it's cool to learn more about our main character. Some things sort of unfold, and he's not quite who you thought he was. It's very cool. If you're into dystopians and you can do more of a slow burning dystopian, then I would definitely check this out. I believe it comes out in March. You'll see for sure when I do my March releases video. If you're interested in it, I would definitely look into it because I really liked it. I gave it 4 stars. Next, I listened to another audiobook, and that is Please Ignore Veera Dietz by A.S. King. This book is about a girl named Veera who has recently lost her friend Charlie. She knows something about him that she's not telling, and Charlie's ghosts are sort of haunting her. It's not a ghost story, but Charlie's ghosts are sort of haunting her, trying to get her to tell someone what she knows. And she works at a pizza place, and her dad's really hard on her, not in that really annoying YA parents are horrible human beings way. He's a good guy. He doesn't abuse her or anything. He's just expects a lot from her. What I really appreciate about A.S. King is that she writes about young adults in a much more real way. It's a real look at real problems that high schoolers might deal with, rather than this guy doesn't like me and my parents are horrible. Can tell I just have a lot of problems with YA. But I think she did it really, really well, and if that sounds interesting to you, I would definitely say it's worth picking up. I gave it 4 stars. Next, I read another digital arc, and that is The Witch Doesn't Burn in This One by Amanda Lovelace. And I feel some of you might be excited about this because it's the sequel to The Princess Saves Herself in This One by Amanda Lovelace, which was very popular. Basically, The Witch Doesn't Burn in This One is the second book in a series of these poetry collections that she's writing. And this one is a lot more about like politics of feminism and misogyny and rape culture. The poems that I found most engaging were the ones about rape culture. I was like, they got me fired up. I definitely think that this was not as good as The Princess Saves Herself in this one, which neither of them I think compare to Milk and Honey. They're a little bit more superficial, I think, and the poetry is just not as refined. I am not a poetry expert in any way, but I definitely do still think they're worth a read, and it was interesting, and I'm really glad that I got to read an arc of it. I gave it 3.5 stars. Next, I read The Little Book of Hygge, Danish Secrets to Happy Living by Mike Viking. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, but I loved this so much. This is like how to socialize for introverts, and also like how to be cozy and happy, and this just made me so cozy reading it. Like, I read it at a really great time too, because I was feeling like a little bit anxious and stressed because it was the first week of school, you know. Sitting down and reading this and like burning a candle and having a blanket over me was just like the most relaxing thing, and I was like, everything's gonna be okay. And then I like had friends over for a game night, which is like very hygge, and I was like, I like this. This is my jam. That's what I've come to understand after reading this book, is that I belong in Denmark. Did I give it 5 stars? I can't remember if I gave it 5 or 4, because it's really beautiful, but like, I don't know if it's profound. No, I gave it 5 stars. I liked it that much. 5 stars. I definitely recommend picking this up if you need a little bit of relaxing in your life. Next, in January for my modern class, I read Hedda Gabler by Henrik Ibsen, and oh my goodness, I love this play. Where has this play been? I thought this was so good and so interesting, and our, again, problematic main character. So basically, the play is about this woman, Hedda Gabler. She's just married this man, and they're back from their honeymoon, and she's like very clearly not happy. Like, she's kind of a terrible person. She's just like always trying to like insult people in like a quippy way, and she's like really materialistic, and like her husband's not that wealthy, and it like makes her unhappy. And she has these 2 pistols that she like keeps in a case, and it's like a thing. But I don't want to explain beyond that, but basically it's about her, and it all takes place in like their parlor, which is like, you know, your classic Henrik Ibsen realism kind of thing. Oh, it's so good. I honestly enjoyed it more than A Doll's House, which is also by Henrik Ibsen. Both great plays. I gave it 5 stars. And if you are interested in theater, I for sure recommend you read this one. Speaking of plays, the next book that I read in January was Good People by David Lindsay-Abaire, and this is a wonderful play. Like, oh my goodness. This is about a 50-year-old woman in South Boston who is struggling financially, and she loses her job, and she has a daughter who has special needs, so losing her job is like really not a good thing. And the whole play is basically just her trying to get a job. It's so good. It's like so simple and so well crafted and so beautiful, and I cried, and I just, I love this. And again, our main character is like not exactly likable. She's like a little problematic, and it's like iffy, and then you're like, I don't know if I trust her or not, and it's so good. If you're a theater person, I definitely recommend you read this one. I want to be 50 years old so I can do a monologue from this. I also want to write like this. Why can I not write like this? Has a mental breakdown. Okay. So then the last book that I read in its entirety in January was Everybody Sees the Ants by A.S. King, and I read this because I had it in my TBR, and after I listened to Please Ignore Veera Dietz by A.S. King, I was like, I really want to read the other A.S. King I have, and I was not disappointed. This is basically about a boy who's being really badly bullied at school, and at the same time, he's trying to save his grandfather, who was a POW in Vietnam, and he's trying to save him in his dreams. Like, he falls asleep and he goes to Vietnam. It's very cool. It's basically about bullying, and like how bullying sort of makes you a prisoner of war, basically, and how it's like a form of torture, and no one does anything about it, and no one really can do anything about it. It's so well done. Again, with A.S. King, she writes really real teenagers, but in a way where she is like aware of their stupidity and like commenting on it, rather than like reveling in their angst. It's more of like an intelligent look at teenagers rather than like a mindless recreation. It's like much more deep than that, and that's what I'm learning that I love about A.S. King's books. I definitely recommend this one as well if that synopsis sounds interesting to you. I ended up giving it 4 stars. And now to explain the 2 books that I like read parts of and didn't finish. The first of those is The Shining by Stephen King, which I have read 150 pages of so far, and I've only read 150 pages because we're doing this for book club. So I can only read so much at a time because I don't want to get ahead and then say things that would be spoilery at my book club. Book club is going so well so far. Everyone really is enjoying this book, and everyone's like, we want more pages, which makes me really happy and is great. And I love meeting and talking with all of you. Mwah. If you don't know what The Shining is about, we have our main character, Jack Torrance, who is the father of this little family, and Jack is an alcoholic with anger issues, and he's gonna go be the caretaker at a hotel for the winter. During the winter, the hotel gets completely snowed off, and scary things start to happen. I already know I'm gonna give it 5 stars. I gave it 5 stars last time I read it. And the last book that I read part of in January is Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke, and this is basically a chunker of a fantasy novel about 2 magicians in England during the Napoleonic Wars, and they want to help fight Napoleon with their magic. I like really love the world. I have so far read 204 pages, and I do plan to continue reading this. I'm just spacing it out because I do still want to read other stuff. I don't just want to devote like an entire month to this book. I will definitely keep you updated on this one. Those are all of the books that I read in January. I'm pretty proud of my reading month. I think it went pretty dang well, so I hope that you enjoyed this and maybe you found another book that you want to pick up and read soon. If you did, please let me know which one it was down in the comments because that kind of stuff makes me excited. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe and comment down below and do all of that stuff, and I will see you in the next video. Bye! Mwah.